I'm Lou Brutus. One of the great pleasures in life to speak to Brent Smith of Shinedown. Brent, how are you?
I'm good. If I could always get an introduction like that from everybody, I would do these Zooms all the time.
So you're in a hotel room in LA. And I remember at the beginning of what I call the recent unpleasantness, going back almost 2 years now, you and I had what I think was a very fortuitous conversation. You were in a hotel in LA at the time. And while everybody else was getting ready to shut down and were kind of figuring out what to do with their careers, you were adamant at the time that not only would you continue to tour, you would continue to make new music. As you look back over the last couple of years, you've got to feel pretty good about what you guys were able to accomplish with both Shinedown and Smith and Myers.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was and is at that particular time, we all were going through a pandemic, and it was at the height of everything. And the biggest thing was, for me, it was just trying to get information and to know what was actually going on. But I just never really had the mentality to go inside. I did what I needed to do for public health, in the beginning. And as this has transpired, I have continuously stayed educated as into what's happening, what's going on, variants and what have you. But the idea that I was just going to completely change my thought process about who I am and what I do and my existence on this planet, which a good friend of mine once said to me, you don't pick the music picks you. And I had a responsibility, not only to my crew and my staff, my record label, my management. I talk about being someone that understands what it means to persevere, what it means to not be complacent, what it means to overcome. But we're all human. And I think that was the biggest thing that I learned from this pandemic and everything that's gone on. The idea was not to give in and not to give up, and to stay educated on everything. And why we decided to go out and tour was simply that, to show, hey, it can be done. I know it may be a little difficult to do it, but it can be done. And then the next phase was just to get it back to the way that it was before. That may never happen again, possibly. But what you do understand now, it's good to see that people are understanding the common sense of what this is, that it is a virus, that you can't get rid of it. You have to become immune to it. Or if anything, what you have to understand is that you have to learn how to live with this. We've been living with viruses for centuries. But the time to, keep everybody at bay and all those elements, we think that needs to, it's time to move forward. And there's a way to move forward respectfully. There's also a way to move forward because it's necessary at this point in time. And that was really the objective of everything, was just to stay educated, understand what was going on. But as a businessman and also as a musician, as an artist, I still had a responsibility to the people that I'm responsible for.
So let's talk about new music. And I guess this is the perfect way to sort of enter it is, before we actually talk about the sort of artistic creative elements therein, let's talk about how you have to approach physically making a record the last several months.
We took 18 weeks and just built our own studio. That's how we had to do it.
That'll do it.
Yeah.
You can make your own rules then.
Yeah. I mean, in 2020, I quarantined in Los Angeles for 28 weeks. By the time I got to June, it was June, and I just took off. I remember I took off June 1st. After we had kind of built the relationship with Direct Relief and the Atlas Falls campaign was moving, and to everybody that helped with that campaign, thank you very much, because we've exceeded $500,000 in COVID-19 research and also gained a lot of great friends with Direct Relief. They're an incredible organization. But yeah, got to Charleston, got in front of Eric. We started to write. As we were writing, though, we were starting to figure out we're not going to be able to go into a studio right now. We were calling and kind of asking our friends in certain areas, is the studio open? Have you booked anything? Are you allowing anyone to come in? And it was no, it was too early. And they were just no, there's no schedule at all. So, with Attention, Eric Bass produced that record, the last album. This album, he produced this one as well. He mixed this record, engineered it. When we did Attention, he had a commercial studio. And then that was the last thing that we did there. So when we finished Attention, he sold that studio, took certain things with him to his new place, just made like a small home studio. So we're in this home studio writing together, and we're looking at each other, and I'm making phone calls about things and what have you about studio time. And it was just not a reality to certain people. So we just looked at each other and said, well, we know how to do it. Let's just build it. And so we ended up building what I believe is a world-class studio called Big Animal on Eric's property in Kiowa Island in South Carolina. And that was one of the greatest things, just to have that experience and to build it in the midst of all of this as we're writing songs and working with each other. But yeah, man, it was 18 weeks to get it done. And it was a labor of love, but really Eric's tech Hoogie was a huge part of the build. Matt and Kenny and in Charleston, you know, everybody kind of banded together to build this state-of-the-art studio. But that was basically what we did. We had no choice, really. We were lucky enough that we had the resources to build it, but then it was all about getting some friends of ours from LA, California, brought Doug McKean back in to help with the engineering as a secondary, brought Mike Fasano back in to tech with Barry's drums and things like that. Spent about 3 weeks in Los Angeles, left Charleston, came out here, and ultimately we worked with our good friend Dave Bassett. Me, Zach, and Eric worked with him in his studio up in Malibu, writing songs and putting some things together. And to be totally honest, we just kept moving the entire time. We weren't tapped creatively at all.
So when it came to the physical creation of the studio, and certainly those things are relatively easier to do than they were 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but right. Still you're going to get curveballs thrown at you. Give me an example of like one headachy thing that came up while building a studio from scratch.
Well, you know what? It's weird. There were little headaches every day, only because Eric is a perfectionist. And here was the one thing. I think the big part of it was nothing in the studio was like bought online. So it wasn't like we were bringing in like soundproofing from online. We weren't shifting walls and like putting like sound replacement in, stuff that was pre-manufactured. Because when we went in, we were knocking, I didn't do the actual wall knocking down. I just helped with the bill. It's always what I helped with. I helped with the bill. But for Eric, everything was handmade. So everything was custom. So like you get into this, like the way that the control room is built, he has diffusers everywhere around. So like the doors will open up, and when they come back together, because you don't even realize when you walk into the studio, you kind of go into like a little lounge area, and then you walk into like the main room, and you're kind of like, okay, this is cool, but where's the live room? And then all of a sudden behind you, because it looks like it's just a big flat wall, that's a diffuser on the wall that was hand built the way that the structure is. And then he just opens it up like that. And then all of a sudden it's like, there's this giant room, you know, big live room in there. And so that was probably, you know, for him, there was ever little headaches because everything was custom. Then there were these panel walls where like these holes were driven in. They had to get this very specific machine. And every single hole that was put into the frame, there was a purpose for where that hole was. A lot of physics going on, man. And he had a friend of his come in and do all of that. And it was like, it was just wild, man. Like the attention to detail and the craftsmanship of everything that's inside of it. You know, once again, it wasn't like store-bought. You didn't run down to Home Depot and throw it up. Like it had to be built. It had to be made by hand.
This place sounds like not only is it a kick-ass studio, it also sounds like it could double as a lair for a James Bond villain.
Not a villain. It's got too many nice colors. Like,
okay.
You know, I mean, unless like, you know, Bond villains like pastels. I don't know.
Yeah, all right. There you go.
Yeah, because Kelly, Eric's wife, she picked the colors. That was her thing too. Kelly was just like, all studios look like Interview with a Vampire. She's like everything's meshed and it's red and it's dark and all this, and she's like, let's spruce it up, let's make it look nice. So there's a lot of like super light colors, which actually I love, because it does, when you walk in, we've got all this stuff like the fancy dimmers and all that kind of stuff, but like when you throw all the lights on, you walk in, it has a very open feel to it. It's very airy. It's also very the colors are just nice to look at. You don't have like, it's not a layer. It's like I don't know how to describe it. It's like a beach house with a lot of cool gadgets in it.
You know, and I would be curious, without prying too much into Eric's personal life, but how close are the other homes there? And is there any bleed through? Because I would imagine some folks might be like, what the hell is that going on 18 hours per day the last 18 weeks, you know?
Right. There's a company, and I'm gonna give them props, even though they don't know who we are probably, but there's a great company called Green Glue, and man, did we use a lot of green glue. Green glue is just this adhesive that when you stack panels together, they're airtight. So I don't even know the actual level of the walls in this studio are like this thick. So like everything is, and then there's like another barrier inside of each specific wall of soundproofing that, once again, all by hand. And he was very, very conscientious of his neighbors. He does live on an island. And when I say that, I know it sounds kind of funny, but in Charleston, it's low country. So there's a lot of these different plateaus and not plateaus, but these little sections of islands and stuff. You know, the intercoastal, and it goes out into the ocean. So he's literally on an intercoastal. So his neighbors are not on, they're not on top of each other. He's kind of like out in the wilderness. And he's like 40 minutes outside of Charleston. And his neighbors are super cool, but he went to them and was like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to make. I just want to let you know, you're never going to hear anything. And to his credit, he works very, very diligently on that. That was actually a really specific thing, you know, because when you break ground on something like this, your foundation has to be correct. Otherwise, it won't work. And he was very diligent about that. The cool thing, though, is that with the new record, we did a lot of fun stuff. Like we recorded drums outside and things like that and what have you. So he would just go to the neighbors the day before and be like, hey, do you mind if we play drums tomorrow outside, like right around this time, from this time to this time? And most of his neighbors were like, hell yeah, go for it. So he has cool neighbors.
You know, and I'm very familiar with that area, by the way. Kiowa Island is gorgeous. Charleston might be my favorite city in the country, and the food is insane.
Yeah.
So with all the time that you spent there, tell me about some of the stuff you or maybe some of the other guys got to do in the area.
Man, once again, you know, it's the second record that we've done together, you know, in-house as a band, you know, back in 2017 when we did Attention. Everybody was based out of Charleston when we were doing that. What you just said, a lot of culture. I didn't stay downtown like I did the first time with Attention. I stayed on King Street, which I was like in the heart of Charleston. Yep. This time around, I stayed at the Andale, which is this absolutely wonderful hotel out in Kiowa Island. It's privately owned, but it's a Marriott under that corporation. But it's a great hotel. If you ever get a chance to go out there and hang out in Kiowa Island, you should, because it's a great little town. But that, man, the biggest thing for me was that it had a calmness to it for me personally. Like when Doug and Barry and Zach and Mike and we got the, you know, and Hoogie, we got all the band back together per se, like in the studio. You know, they would take the trip like 40 minutes down to King Street and some other places just to go to Hall's Steakhouse and things like that. They were like they were always frequenting, you know, Hall's Steakhouse and what have you. But my biggest thing is that, you know, we're right there on the water too. So your sunsets are gorgeous. You know, we would paddleboard a lot, like in the morning, and then go into the studio later that day. You're surrounded by nature, you know, you're hanging out there with, alligators and everything else that's, out there and what have you. But there's this hearkening back to, Mother Nature, out there also, which kind of gave us all a lot of peace in some ways with the new build and with the studio and what have you. But I mean, South Carolina, just as a whole, some of the greatest people in the world that you could ever come into contact with. And I mean that wholeheartedly. There is just something about that area where everybody comes from all walks of life, and there's just the camaraderie. There's the humanity in that city is quite extraordinary. Just great people. It's just a great place to make a record. I mean, we've made 2 of them there now.
Let us, if we can, talk about your approach to lyrics for this album. Planet Zero is, of course, the first song we've got to hear. We're certainly living in what even an optimist would call fairly bleak times. So, tell me where your headspace is at going into this thing first.
My headspace with all of it is perseverance. My headspace with all of it is being educated. My headspace with it is humility and also empathy, but also strength in numbers. We wrote this record in the most point blank way I can say it. This album was written for the people, by the people. And there's a lot to that. And I'm not even talking about just, in this country, when I say a statement like that, it's the freedom to be an individual from a global standpoint. We all know what we've been through in the last 2 years, entering year 3 of what is going on. But I think that the good thing is now is that people are starting to become more educated on things. They are starting to ask questions. But when I rewind and go back to June of 2020, when I left California, got to South Carolina with Eric, and then the question became, okay, what do we write about? How do we do it? And we even talked at a certain point in time about having kind of the crystal ball method, which is you're writing for 3 years from now. Because at the time, everything was in flux and it was intense. And when I got to South Carolina, that's immediately following that. That's when, the height of protests had been happening, everything that had gone on with the injustice of what happened to George Floyd, but then how not just America, but the world was rallying around this, and making the statement of it comes down to a simple thing. What's right and wrong, you know what I mean? And the wrong thing happened. And that still to this day is hard to digest for me personally, because it's just gut-wrenching and heartbreaking to remember. And, I remember when, we watched in real time a man get murdered on live television, and it still sits with me. And it's difficult because you don't want to think you don't want to believe that kind of evil still exists. And the thing is that when we go back to June, July of 2020, when we're asking that question to each other, like, let's talk about, after we come out of this, let's talk about what it's going to be like when we come out of it. And we were trying to do that, but it just kept getting more and more intense. And it kept getting more and more intense with the virus. And it kept getting more intense with just how people were viewing each other and how things were being presented in this glass box here, from certain media outlets, and how that was becoming very divisive, and how clickbait became this new way of selling or, getting your media out there. I'm here to tell you right now, if you go out into the real world, and Lou, you know this because you've been out in the real world. In the real world, people aren't trying to destroy one another. Not from my experience that I'm seeing right now. I see a lot of growth. I see a lot of help that people are trying to give each other. There's a lot of camaraderie. I mean, we're in Los Angeles right now, and Los Angeles, aside from, everybody out here is really, they're tired. They're tired of having to kind of wear the mask. They're doing it, but they're tired. They just, there's a lot of different elements that go into this. But when you get to the song, Planet Zero and you get to the album, the whole thing was about the people. It's not so much that the people have spoken, the people are speaking now. You know, when you have a curtain and you are in a position where you think that you have an upper hand on society, and then you put society in a pressure cooker, it's going to ignite at a certain point in time. And I think that Planet kind of pulls the curtain open, and you have to handle what is actually going on. You have to understand what's actually going on. People do not need to be chastised for asking questions, for being concerned. People do not need to be chastised or told to shut up because they are questioning certain authority and wondering, why is this still happening? Or why is this going on for so long? Why is this not getting any better? You know, and at a certain point in time, you have to remember that there's more of us as citizens on this planet than there are representatives. And what I mean by that is I'm not an anarchist under any circumstances. You know, what I am is a humanist, you know, and I think more than anything, people are starting to really educate themselves. They're starting to get wiser, and they're getting wise to what's actually happening right now. And here's the thing, we can stop it if we want to. We actually have that power. Me and you have talked about this before. You know, Planet Zero is a rally cry, you know, more than anything. And not the type of, you know, it's about rallying together and understanding one another. But we know what's going on at this point. And now is the time to figure out, all right, what's actually the truth and what is not the truth, and who does have society's best interest in mind. I'll tell you this too. You know, you see the things about how the internet is undefeated. Mother Nature is undefeated. I'll go ahead and tell you that right now. We are a very, very fleeting blip in the in this galaxy, and we know that there's billions and billions of different universes and galaxies and everything else, or at least we think we know. And if you let that resonate for a minute, you know, I often tell people, if you want to try something, take a piece of paper, write at the top of the piece of paper, write the number 4 billion, and then underneath it, write your age. It'll give you perspective of how long this orb has been spinning in, you know, in infancy. So, you know, you have to take that into consideration also. I mean, what we learned from this pandemic, what we're still learning from it. But there's got to be a moment where people are allowed to take their lives back. And that's what a lot of Planet Zero is about, man. It really, really is.
You know, and one of the great things about the song is that, and again, like anybody else hearing a song for the first, you know, couple of dozen times that I've listened, I'm you know, trying to make sense of it. And okay, what does this mean? What does that mean? What does it mean to me? While all that's going on, it's a fucking barn burner. It's a catchy song, because you can have the greatest ideas in the world in a song, but if it's not a good song, nobody's going to hear it. And
No.
there's a certain rawness to it too that I really enjoy.
Yeah, that was all on purpose, man. Eric, myself, Zach, Barry, we labored over that riff. We really, really did. We labored over that riff because it had to be that. It had to be it had to be instant. And that was the other thing too. We really do listen to our fan base, whether they've been there from the beginning or they're just kind of finding out who we are. And all they asked for, they were like, whatever the first single is, we know that you guys are adventurous. We know you're ambitious. We know you do a lot of, you know, different types of soundscapes, and we would never, ever tell you not to do that. But will you, out of the gate, please, will you give us a banger? And we said, absolutely. And so that we took that very seriously, like a banger, but a banger that is not necessarily A, what you would think we would do, maybe, and B, something that could ignite. When it came on, people were like, you know, oh, what's that? Eric took a different approach sonically, not just with Planet Zero, the song, but with the record. We're known for this band that makes these cinematic records, lots of layers, lots of orchestration, you know, a lot of musicianship, big wall of sound. And we appreciate that, and we love those records, and we've done those records. And I'm not saying that this record isn't big, but But one thing is 80% of the vocals on this record, they're dry. There's no effects on them. They're compressed, locked into the track, but there's not a bunch of like effects. He also pushed me way up front in the mix. The guitars are screaming through the record. Not a lot of effects on the guitars either, man. Guitars are pushed way up front. Pretty much a stereo left and right. Not like, 12 tracks of the same guitar, layer and layer and layer, where it can kind of start to get muddy. We call that big mono because you just keep stacking the guitar layer. So he split everything in stereo, wanted it to have more where each speaker has a different guitar in it. It makes it different. It changes the sound. It also allows you to turn the amplifier up and really see what the amplifier can do. It was more about, instead of like layering it to make it big, it was more about like find a sound that's really, really great, and then use that. With the drums, same thing. He didn't sound replace anything. The drums you hear on the record are Barry's drums. That's what he played. He reinforced them a little bit, but those are the real drums. Same thing with, some of the things that Eric would take liberty to with some of the special effects and some of the orchestration that's in there and the synthesizers. Not as much as traditional Shinedown records. This is more of it's a very real rock record, in our opinion, with a lot of depth. There's also songs on the record that there's a song on the album called Daylight, and Daylight might be one of my most proud moments, as a songwriter, for all of us, because it was something that kind of fell out of we call them gifts. They're songs that write themselves in like 20, 30 minutes. You have no idea where they came from, and they just kind of fall in your lap. And you have no choice but to just write them. And Daylight did that. It was, I'm really excited for people to hear that. There's another song on the record called Hope, that just completely blew me away with what Eric did in the production. There's a lot of moments like that, where Eric, he really, really pushed himself. The man didn't sleep for a year. And I'm actually not being facetious or silly. Like when I said he didn't sleep for a year, I mean, you're talking about 18 hours a day. Like he would get like 2 or 3 hours here and there, he just immersed himself in this record, and you can hear it.
Is the album sequenced yet? Because
yes.
Planet Zero vibes like an album opener. It also seems like it would be a fun tune to open a set with. So tell me about sequencing.
Sequencing was really important. If you're looking online right now, as we're getting closer, we've let some things go, getting ready for everything. We've introduced everybody to Siren, which Siren's an interesting character in the record. Siren pops up inside of the record at times, kind of taking you on this journey. And the sequence was actually easier once. So we go to master the record. I kind of forcefully drug us out of the studio to go master the record, because Eric was like mixing and mixing. He's like, I've almost got it. He was just, at a certain point in time, we were like, we got to master it. And plus I missed our good friend Ted Jensen in Nashville, because he masters all of our records. And so I got him out. I said, this is when we're going. I called Ted. I was like, hey, what's your Monday look like? It was a Friday. I called Ted. I was like, hey, what's your Monday look like? He was just like, I don't know. You tell me. And I was like, we'll be there on Monday. And I remember walking in the studio and telling Eric, hey, we're going to master it on Monday. And he's like, but he's like, okay. The following day, because it was Friday, then it was Saturday. Actually, hang on a second. It might have been Wednesday, because it took Eric 3 days to do what Siren happened in 72 hours. So once I told Eric, hey, we're going to go master, he's like, yeah, I know, but I had this thing that I wanted to do in between the songs, and I didn't really get a chance to do it on Attention. I want to do it this time, but I just don't know what it is. And I'm like, well, you better get moving.
Do it now. Whatever it is you're going to do it now.
And to his credit, because of that, he created this moment in the album that really does glue it together with Siren. But what he was able to do in 72 hours, that helped change the sequence when we got to Nashville. Because then all of a sudden, there was a reason to start the first 3 songs like this. Then there was a reason to go to this. We knew what the finale was going to kind of be. I should tell people this, though, too. I know this record isn't out just yet, but there is a secondary set of songs that will hopefully be seen, you know, not like 2 more years from now. Hopefully, like next year, towards the back of next year, we'll be able to kind of bridge this record with another piece, because we wrote all these songs that we really, really love. But we're like, well, we can't put them all out. But it's one of those things, man, where we're like, yeah, all the songs that we wrote, we focused so hard on them that they're really strong. But going back to this record, one thing at a time, it was super, super important that the sequence made sense, obviously. But without Siren, I don't know if it would have made the sense that it actually does now. If it would have been a collection of songs, I think it still would have been great. But it definitely helped tie in the sequence once we had created what is Siren. Yeah, man, once we had her, it was a pretty seamless sequence. Her, him, we don't know what he or she is actually.
You know, have you given any thought to the tour coming up? Are there going to be any sort of dramatic interludes in between the songs to take advantage of that, or any of the other sort of narrative things that you guys have put on records before?
Yeah, definitely. And that will evolve over time, and we'll have growth to that. I mean, this is definitely one of those records where I see, you know, a few years down the line, you know, fingers crossed, people really love the record. But this is definitely an album that you could play in its entirety, not unlike Attention, and not unlike some of the other albums, but definitely we're actually building the new stage show for the tour we're doing with the Pretty Reckless and Diamante. We start off on first show is in San Francisco, and we actually have to. We were a little off of the timeline on the Planet Zero official music video, so that's actually being filmed on the 27th, the day before Los Angeles. We play the Wiltern. We haven't played Los Angeles in like 5 years, so we have a West Coast area of touring that we're doing. Starts on the 26th, ends on February 8th. We had to reschedule Canada till July, but the stage show for April and May, I just saw the main drawings last week, because me and Zach that's kind of our thing, is building out the studio, or sorry, building out the staging. We have an incredible designer, Mitch Schillinger, who is an extraordinary mind when it comes to live shows and building these stages that are massively interactive. I mean, we're going all the way in April and May for the people. This stage show looks one of the proudest things I've ever seen us put together, to be honest with you. I think it's a total buckle up, like roller coaster ride of a show. I think people are really gonna dig it.
Plus, I love Taylor. I love the Pretty Reckless, and Diamante, I hope, finally comes into her own, because that girl is so fucking good. And I'm like, folks, amazing. Check her out.
Just a pure and beautiful, just a hustler too. Yeah. Like totally independent and just awesome at what she does. I have such an affection for her as an artist. She's really awesome. And I've been wanting to tour with the Pretty Reckless for the better part of, I don't know, since they became a band, to be honest with you. And Taylor could not be more professional and more just ready. She's ready too, man. She's very excited for this tour. You know, this is an arena tour. It's everything you want a rock and roll show to be, from all 3 acts. You know, it was also important, you know, we wanted more of a diversity with this tour. It was specific, you know. I was like, I really would like, you know, the bands that were out there with, you know, on this run, these 2 months. I'm just a big fan of Diamante. I'm a huge fan of the Pretty Reckless, and I think it's important too to show the camaraderie between men and women on tour. You know, I think it's important.